loud enough? You guys are so far away, it seems kind of weird. It's just, like, this doesn't have to be that formal, right? Right? Alright, so one, I'm honored to have been invited to speak to you guys. Militarism and kind of war mongering and war fear has been like the underlying current of this country for such a long time. That's kind of our natural state, right? That I don't think the United States has gone more than 2 years without being in a conflict outside of our borders, and inside our borders we wage war against the internally colonized people, black and indigenous people, right? And that's an ongoing system. And that's one that we have to kind of put up with and face as we go forward every day. So while we look externally at the current saber rattling between North Korea and the United States, we have to remember that that's our natural state, and that we have to start to address this as kind of a foundational issue and not as a symptom and not as today's crisis, but an ongoing crisis. And I know that the anti-war movement, going back to the turn of the century, has been committed to looking at militarism as both an economic issue, a justice issue, an ethical issue, and a moral issue, right? So when you think about it, in the current way we view our armed services, our policemen, our soldiers, our veterans, all of it, we tend to put them up on this weird pedestal right now, which is appropriate for soldiers who a lot of times are forced into those decisions, but it's not real. Right? We're not really supporting the people who are doing the fighting. We're not really supporting the families that are disrupted by the choices that children make to enter into armed service, are we? We kind of left them out to dry. I'm trying to remember his name. He wrote J'accuse, right? He said that we worship the sound and the sight of the trumpet and the plumed helm more than the soldier who toils in the field, right? And that's where we're at right now. We have a cabinet full of generals. We have a president who believes that violence is the answer for everything. We have a police state that acts in the most knee-jerk and most violent way possible. To think that any of those things are separate is to do so at our peril. And then we have to talk about how we react to each other in confronting these issues. It's very, very easy. It's very easy for me to be critical of how a movement functions when I'm not inside that movement. And so we have to be really cognizant of how we approach other choices, other tactical decisions and strategic decisions made by organizations that we would support, to say, well, how come I'm not on that line, right? The root of a nonviolent movement is its creativity, right? And its commitment to civil disobedience, to shutting it down, right? Those are the anchor parts of a creative, non-violent, transformative movement. And we have to ask ourselves, we have to really examine, are we serving that in the best, strongest way possible? Are we illustrating how the conflict plays out on our bodies and on the bodies of black and brown youth and the bodies of black and brown people around the world through our actions? Are we stepping back and allowing other people to do the confrontation for us sometimes, and then offering a criticism in its place? It's a question that Martin Luther King asked in the letter from a Birmingham jail, right? He asked us to examine inside of our hearts, all of us, to say, are we as committed to each other's liberation for an anti-militarist, not just non-militarist, an anti-militarist view? Are we really committed to this? And that commitment requires us to make room for all the tactics that are out there, and to make room for each other to come together around these issues. When we look at the roots of violence, we have to say to each other, where are they? Where is the root? Are we looking at the retail violence on a street corner between one hoodlum attacking another hoodlum? Or are we looking at the wholesale violence in Rhode Island, where black life only is mattered to a certain degree, right? Right now, violence is expressed in a very, very clear way inside our community. More than 11% of white people survive past 65. Did you know that? I mean, how many people here are over 65? Right, that's good and bad. Is more than 10% of white people survive past 65. Only 3% of African Americans survive past 65. That's murder. That's not a passive choice. That's when we hit the age of 55, which I'm only a few years away from right now, we drop off. Those are active choices that we make. When we look at violence, we have to look at the violence of gentrification and how the choices we make about where we send our children to school and how we send our children to school. Did we ever utter the sentence, I'm moving out of the city to go to a good school, is what we are doing is segregating a community, right? We are raising the price for that community for the people who are there and then leaving them with the bill that you raised the check on. That's violence. When we look at violence, we also have to look at the militarism of our prison system, which is regimented, dieted, and tortured us to believing that sexual violence is a penalty for a crime. We make jokes about it in common culture now. Where are we? When we complain about saber rattling over here, but we say the threat of rape is a suitable punishment for a criminal right here at home. Where is that in our dialogue about how violence plays out on each other and how it plays out in our language? Because I work as a union and labor organizer, the language of conflict is natural to me. It's where we live. In fact, the first words of the National Labor Relations Act is in order to cool the battlefield between management and labor. And it is a battlefield. But when we think about it, how that plays out on each other, it plays out in a way that is so heartbreakingly cruel and so torturous to the individual that we have to ask is this violence playing out in a way that I'm participating? Are my choices committing that violence? And are we doing enough to mitigate it? So here's the challenge that I'm going to offer to all of us here today. And this is a commitment that I'm willing to make.
Daddy,
Yes.
I need to go to the
Give me 2 minutes. Okay? Is when we see confrontation, particularly in demonstrations right now, when we see confrontations, and this is an existential fight for people of color, queer people, and immigrants, right? Our lives are on the line right now. There have already been more than 500 murders and countless assaults and batteries with hospitalization following. When we see that confrontation erupting, we have to ask ourselves, where is our creative nonviolence intervening in this action? Where is our creativity and our commitment to our principles and our ethics and our morals stepping up to the plate? If we're going to criticize, we have to be willing to take the place of what we are criticizing. And if we are not willing to make that honest commitment to challenging our internal, native-born, ruthless, brutal, and relentless white supremacist violence here, with our bodies, with our minds, with our money, with our creativity, with our hearts, with our souls, with our churches, with our land, with our voting, if we're not willing to do that every day, then we have to re-examine our actual commitments. Now, Jobs with Justice will stand with you committed to engaging in creative, ongoing, militant, direct action in a nonviolent way for as long as you are willing to stand with us. We'll make that commitment to you as openly and as honestly everywhere that you go, we will go. In the hope that where we go, you will be there offering your expertise, your commitment, your time, your heart, your solidarity, and the love that you bring to every action that you have. We need you as much as you need us to do this. So the things that we're going to take away is that we are going to be committed, recommit ourselves to behaving in the most creative way possible. We will no longer allow ourselves to publicly criticize what we may not agree with. And if we do, I mean, talking about inside the movement now, but we will allow ourselves time to engage in a real dialogue about tactics and strategy. And we will look at our behavior individually as citizens in Rhode Island and as residents of Rhode Island, how we react to our ongoing cruelties that we see here. We will change that life expectancy. We will be committed to it. We will no longer punish preschoolers, black preschoolers at a rate higher and dooming them to a lifetime of cruelty. We have that commitment inside our hearts. And we will have that with you as long as I know you're together. So are we together?
Yes.
Are we committed to a nonviolent future?
Yes.
And we can do it together without militarism and hatred and horror?
Yes.
Right? And free ourselves from terror once and for all, right? All together now, right? All together we can do it, right?
Yes.
Thank you very much.